reasons they were being judged by God was the fact that they were trusting in the wrong support. In other words, they were giving. Yeah, now we can hear. Uh, they were giving too much of their trust into the tangible things of life and putting their trust in those things. Uh, we talked about the fact that, particularly in verse 4 of chapter 3, that they were following childish leaders. There it says, I will make boys their officials, mere children will govern them, because of the fact that they were just putting their trust in the wrong principles and in the wrong places in that situation. And I had several people come up to me after class last week and talk about how ironic that is, because it just seems like we're reliving that principle right now, because it seems like our leaders are um, like children, kind of everybody's wanting their own way and won't compromise, and it's amazing how those things seem to repeat themselves. But also it talks about the civil disorder that was taking place in verse 6. It says, a man will seize one of his brothers and at his father's home and say, you have a cloak, you be our leader, take charge of this heap of ruins. And then verse 7 says, but in that day he will cry out, and I will have no remedy. I have no food or clothing in my house. Do not make me the leader of the people. And so there was a conflict going on socially in that situation, to where there was civil disorder. And a little bit later on in verse 8, it says, Jerusalem staggers. Judah is falling. Their words and their deeds are against the Lord, defying His glorious presence. And so they were defying the presence of God in favor of the social interaction that they were having. And then he also talks about the social corruptions that were taking place in verse 10 and following. It says there, tell the righteous it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. Woe to the wicked, disaster is upon them. They will be paid back for what their hands have done. And so this social corruption that was finding its way into the running of that government in Judah and Jerusalem at that time. And so these are not just specific to this situation, as we just observed from the principle of childish leaders. These are principles that are true today, and we might be able to see the application in government. But what we need to realize is the fact that what God is saying to Judah and Jerusalem has also an application from the standpoint of the spiritual application of that within the church. I believe that this can find its application in the church as well, because how many times do we have a tendency to look at a person and say, well, we think that you fit the role, when quite honestly, we may be looking at the wrong qualities. And so it's important for us to make sure that we look at God's principles, at God's qualities, when we're applying those principles of leadership. A little bit later on in verse 14, it says, the Lord enters into judgment against the elders and leaders of his people. It is you who have ruined my vineyard. The plunder from the poor your houses. Verse 15, what do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor, declares the Lord, and declares the Lord Almighty. And so he says, basically, you're acting in such a corrupt way that even the innocent and the weak are being victim of your unfaithfulness. And we kind of got most of it covered last week, just doing a little bit of a preview or a review of that. But look at verse 16 and following. He says, it says there, the Lord says, the women of Zion are haughty, walking along with outstretched necks, flirting with their eyes, tripping along with menacing steps, with ornaments jingling on their ankles. Therefore the Lord will bring sores on their heads of the women of Zion, and the Lord will make their scalps bald. So what is he talking about here? He's still talking about reasons why he's bringing judgment against Judah and Jerusalem. What's the problem here, as he describes it? Okay. Okay. All right. I think you're right.
Am I wrong to assume that they're walking around like hookers?
Well,
is that the correct term?
Well, the terminology is probably correct. I kind of hesitate of using that kind of terminology, but it's true. I mean, you're right. There's no way around it. And so when we look at it, he's basically saying what is happening is that the influence of the women is part of the downfall.
Bob, to put it in 1 Timothy terms, these women, they're being immodest because what they're wearing is taking away from the godliness.
Exactly.
And so they're putting the focus on themselves rather than God and rather than righteous living.
Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right. Think about something else. Go with me back to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 26 has a principle there that I guess it's not 26, is it?
No, it's not 26. Don't get that far.
Is it 16? Oh, yeah. Genesis chapter 3, and look at verse 16. It says, to the woman, he said, I will greatly increase your pains in childbearing. With pain you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. When you look at that word desire, a lot of times we say, well, that's just talking about a physical attraction or a physical desire. But the reality of that is simply the truth that that word desire carries with it the desire to dominate and the desire to take control. That's the meaning of that word desire in Genesis 3:16. And when you think about that, when you parallel that with, go over to Ephesians chapter 5. In Ephesians chapter 5, we find first from verse 22 on that, Paul has a pretty extensive discussion about the similarities between husbands and wives and Christ and the church. But go down to verse 32. And it says, this is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. And then in verse 33, he says, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. And notice a very interesting statement there at the very end of that verse. It says, and the wife must respect her husband. He doesn't say love. He says the wife must respect her husband. Why do you think that he would use such a connotation as respect? Y'all aren't going to answer. You're going to let me tell you, aren't you?
Well, we, Christ being we're the bride of Jesus. We're certainly called to respect him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, two things. What about the male ego that might be considered in here? Does the male have a need to be respected? He does, yeah. You can call that fragile, however you want to describe it. But he also says that the wife needs to respect the husband. And I believe that that's intended from the standpoint of the fact that there has always, I believe always has been that conflict between male and female, between husband and wife, as to control of, or as we might say, who wears the pants in the family.
Hey, Bob, the Bible also says the wife, the husband should respect the wife, treat her as a weaker vessel.
Mm-hmm.
So both of them should respect.
Right. But when we look at that and we see this principle here in Isaiah chapter 3, we find the situation where it's kind of a natural thing, if you will, for the women of society to want to step up and be in control and be in charge and that type of thing. And I mean, we see it in our world today, don't we? And I'm not down on women. Please don't think that, because that's really not the issue. Because for one thing, I just stop and remind all of us about what kind of bad situation this church would be in if it wasn't for the influence of our women. So we're not saying that all women are bad or anything like that. We're not even saying that God is saying that, because, you know, even this afternoon, Leland asked me for a passage that talks about how the influence of a wife can be so impactful that it can cause her unbelieving husband to want to become a Christian. That's in 1 Peter chapter 3. But yet here in this passage in Isaiah chapter 3, he said, it talks about how these women are using very ungodly representations of themselves in order to have an influence, and not a good influence, on the situation in Judah and Jerusalem.
Judah and Jerusalem should be on their knees in front of God
Mhm.
because of the pronouncement that he's making. And these women are just like throwing it in God's face, saying, we don't care what you think.
Right.
We don't care what you want.
Exactly. Right?
There was a reference that sent me to Micah, and God was telling the people there that bad things were coming to them, you know,
Mhm.
and they should be wearing sackcloth
Mhm.
and ashes.
Right.
Instead of having on all of this declaration on their bodies that these women had, and the attitudes that they're showing, it's nothing but just another slap in the face to God to say, you know, we really don't care.
Sure. And you know, when you think about that, and the fact that we can't minimize the impact and the power that women can have on society. You know, how many times have we heard the terminology, the hand that rocks the cradle does what? Rules the world. And there's a lot of truth to that. And, you know, there have been things written about, for instance, the Roman Empire that one of the very detrimental influences of the fall of the Roman Empire was the influence of women in that society, that where they had been given the power to do very similar things to what he's describing here in Isaiah 3, and cause the downfall of that society as well. So, so what do we take from that? As far as our situation is concerned, first of all, we take from it, as I talked about, I would not want for this church to have to function for more than a week without the influence of our women. Because not only from the standpoint of teaching, but service in all different applications of service, just the support that they provide, all of those things. I mean, y'all wouldn't want me without my wife, because she's the one that keeps me on track and reminds me and make sure that I'm doing checking on. She reminds me to check on people, and she reminds me to do those things. She is a great support and a great helper in my ministry, I think the men of this congregation would be in agreement with that principle, that they wouldn't want to try to survive spiritually without the influence of their women. And yet, because of that influence and that great power, they also would have the power to influence in a bad way. And that's really what he's referring to here in this situation in Jerusalem. He talks about how they're walking around with outstretched necks and flirting with their eyes. A little bit later on, in verse 17, he says, "Therefore the Lord will bring sores on their heads, on the heads of the women of Zion, and the Lord will make their scalps bald."
I'm going to say somewhere, and I don't know what verse, or I may be totally wrong, but that a woman's hair is kind of the preeminent beauty of a woman in this, especially in this time.
Yeah.
So he's going to take away the one very thing that represents them.
Well, I can tell you in a much different application of that principle was when Melva was going through chemo, and it happened to be on a Sunday night, and she had stayed at home, and I was teaching and preaching on a Sunday night, and she called me and said it started, and she was in tears, and her hair was just coming out in clumps, in handfuls, and that type of thing. And she was not only a physical mess, but an emotional mess. And in that situation, a bunch of the women from the congregation went with me and helped her through that. Not only helped her, to deal with the loss of hair, but the emotional aspect of it. I don't know what we would have done if they hadn't been there, because losing her hair was undoubtedly the most emotional part of the cancer experience that she had. And so sometimes people like me think that a bald head is not that big a deal, but to a woman it's a lot to deal with.
And there are religious organizations in our community right now who the women have to have long hair.
Yeah.
There's no cutting it,
Mhm.
okay?
That's right. Mhm.
So,
Well, and I have no judgmental comment about that.
no, I'm not either, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that is part of
Right.
a woman when they're in a group.
Well, mine doesn't say anything about their hair.
It doesn't.
It says,
Well-
"And the Lord will discover their secret parts."
In the latter part of verse 17,
Yes, sir.
is that right?
says the Lord will lay bare their secret parts.
Mine says foreheads.
Says what?
Their foreheads.
Their foreheads? Yeah, I've switched to the New American Standard, and it says the Lord will make their foreheads bare. That's what the New American Standard says. What version do you have?
New King James. Well,
Oh, New King James? Let's
Verse
look at that.
24 says they'll be bald-headed.
I don't
What'd you
have
say, Mark?
King
Marcia?
James right here.
Verse 24
Yeah, I said baldness.
in this version.
Yeah, well, King James says they're secret parts, and I don't know what the discrepancy is, quite honestly. I did look at the New American Standard, in the balding of the forehead, and I thought it was close enough
Yeah,
to,
well, that's why I couldn't, mine says a completely different thing here, and I don't know.
yeah. But, undoubtedly, I can't
The,
coincide with the discrepancy, in that and in the hair situation.
I can't remember the English on it, but the Hebrew here is for the region above your eyebrows.
The region above your eyebrows. Okay.
So, I mean, that's about as clear as it gets.
Yeah. Okay. So, there's a lot of implications there, I guess, but simply the fact that undoubtedly one of the things that was concerning, he says, the Lord will make their area above their eyebrows or their scalps bald. In other words, I think that across the board is recognizing the fact that is part of the glory of a woman is, to have hair and that type of thing. And, just think about this whole situation, about how he is describing the downfall of female behavior. And think about our society. Think about the fact that, quite honestly, it wasn't that long ago, and I don't want to pick on any certain technique or anything like that, but it was unheard of to have like nose rings and piercings and tattoos and all those things. And I'm not making any judgment about that, but in our society, once that starts, it's like, wow, look at her, she's got a nose ring, or she's got a tattoo, or she's got this, or she's got that. And it causes a lot of younger women, if you will, to be drawn to that because of the influence of women that have chosen to do those things to themselves. And again, going back to what Colin was saying a while ago, of having the attitude of drawing attention to themselves rather than drawing attention to God. And that's really what we're dealing with here, isn't it? The fact that any time that we do anything to draw attention away from God is a concern. And even, look at verse 24. Instead of fragrance, there will be a stench. Instead of a sash, a rope instead of well-dressed hair, baldness. Instead of the fine clothing, sackcloth. Instead of beauty, brandy. There's just all sorts of implications there where he says, this judgment that I'm about to bring upon Judah and Jerusalem, one of the targets is going to be the women who have had a negative influence on that society. He goes on to say in verse 25, your men will fall by the sword, your warriors in battle. The gates of Zion will lament and mourn, destitute. She will sit on the ground. And so he's basically saying she's about to become humbled. because of her lack of willingness to give God his place in her life. And when that happens, again, we go back to the principle: the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So that, you know, the influence of women, you know, most of the time in our understanding of things, it's positive, but it can also turn negative pretty fast. All right, we'll